Hey, what's up guys? JB here. And in today's Future Look, we're continuing on with the Final Fantasy XIII collaboration. And today we're looking at none other than Snow. And I feel like this guy was a pretty polarizing character from what I've seen out there. You know, he has his haters, he has his fans. And personally, I'm kind of neutral on him. I'd say he was, a little bit of a generic sort of hero, at least in the first Final Fantasy XIII game. He is coming to War of the Visions as a 90 cost ice unit and is purported to be sort of a frontline tank style unit. So let's preview and dive into his kit and see what he can do. So as we said, Snow is going to be a 90 cost ice unit, and fittingly, he can wear hats and cloth. His TMR has 2 casts and it brings 30 accuracy along with 25 ice attack. So similar to Lightning's TMR, this one definitely gets a little bit more value in its effect compared to your typical TMR, since it is bringing 2 different effects. The caveat there being its ice elemental focus. So I see this as pretty decent for an ice party, and this does appear to work similar to like Velus's haste ability in that you'll target an ally up to 3 squares away, and both of you actually will get the buff. Nothing game breaking here with this TMR, but could see some use for an ice party, maybe trying to combat an evade meta. Moving on to Snow's stats, and we have a tank tier hit points pool coming in at just under 5200 HP. And that currently has him sitting at 9th overall on the Japanese side. His base HP value actually does come in a couple of ticks below other tanks out there, but this is a solid total nonetheless. Adding to that, we have very nice physical bulk here with an innate 18 defense along with some nice resistances, particularly to slash at 20% and pierce damage at 15%. His attack value is actually in a pretty good spot as well. The 454 value that he has is definitely not in the top tier, but it is above the UR average. His base attack value though is actually quite good at 393, which is within the top 20. And that will have Snow scaling very well when it comes to percentage base attack buffs. And that strong base value in his stats was something that I did notice on him in a few areas, including his dex and luck. While the innate totals that he has here are relatively average and middle of the pack at 228 and 234 respectively, his base values in those categories are actually above average. So his stats here do have the capability of scaling pretty well. Though I will say that these base values do put him in a rather pedestrian area when it comes to his base accuracy value. He does have some ways of getting around that accuracy issue though that we'll talk about a little bit later. On the more negative side, 0 spirit for Snow. On top of that, his only negative damage resistance is magic attack at -5%. So that's definitely something that's a little bit of a concern, when it comes to his damage mitigation, but not insurmountable by any means. I do want to point out here as well what I feel is a particularly weak mastery ability at just 5% HP and 5 innate hate. And in terms of auto tanking, of course, that 5 innate hate is invaluable. But otherwise, this is just a very, very lackluster mastery ability. And that is something that I've noticed in general on units over the past 5 to 6 months, that pretty much since Mastery 2s were introduced into the game, I feel like they are intentionally leaving new unit mastery abilities a little bit bare bones, just to sort of give themselves maybe some additional design space to come in and retool the units later with a mastery update. Looking in on Snow's support abilities and counters, and the passive that he's getting from his new unique main job is essentially an upgraded Holy Knight's Protection. And that's bringing in that same HP and defense passive, and it's adding to that another 5 innate hate. So this is interesting, for a couple of reasons. First, that 12 defense is going to bring him up to an innate 30 right out of the box, which is pretty substantial. We are, however, in an age of heavy defense penetration in the game. I think that that's still nice to have, nonetheless. More importantly though, in terms of Snow's tanking capability, is that this, including his mastery, is bringing him up to an innate 10 hate. And this is a level of innate hate that we've never seen before on any tank in the game so far. And of course the nice thing about that is that innate hate can't be dispelled, so you'll always be guaranteeing that that enmity will be directed towards Snow. Now personally, I would probably be pairing that with the Shadowrunner passive that he gets from Ninja, though I think you could certainly make good arguments for either Warrior Spirit or Shikuchi here as well. Shikuchi, of course, would be a must in my opinion for manual PvP. In terms of auto, I would say it's more map dependent. A reason that you might want it on is that, as we'll kind of see in the skills overview, the range of his skills is actually a concern for Snow. So that additional mobility would be nice to sort of hedge against that. And that's sort of where that map dependency would come into play, as you would just need to make sure you have enough time and space to be able to get off his two important buffs. Another potential option would be maybe an accuracy build for Snow, and that would be with the Flurry enhancement passive here for the 20 accuracy. And this would bring him in the neighborhood of 180% innate accuracy or better, which I think is actually a pretty good spot to be. Ice does have some nice accuracy cards as well, including Odin. And this one has the side benefit of upgrading one of his counters as well, which could be a consideration. Now, speaking of counters, I really don't love the options that Snow has, and that's mainly due to the range on them. They're all just a single tile of effect. I think I would personally use that Flurry counter, even in its base 30% chance form. And the reason I would do that is because it's a 2-hit attack. And if you were to proc off this counter, it would put Snow in a good position to cap on that 2-hit chain. So I do kind of like the potential of that. If you did opt for that Flurry enhancement passive that we were just talking about, it does actually up the probability of this counter to go off up to 50% and increases the damage on it as well to a medium modifier. Now Snow, as we'll begin to see, is a unit with high sustain and high bulk factor, and of course directing the enemy's hits to him, he could have several opportunities to get this counter off. So I do see some potential maybe for this counter. I think though in most cases I would probably stick to that initial build that we talked about and probably just stick to the base Flurry counter here for most scenarios. Alright, so let's start diving into Snow's main job, and we'll start first with his buffs. And the first one here is a self-only 20 defense and spirit buff that provides him 100 defense debuff resistance on top. And this one is okay, nothing spectacular here, although I think that there definitely is some value to that defense debuff resistance. I'm generally less enthused about that particular debuff resistance just because of the existence of all the high defense penetration in the game. So I do tend to value a lot more the elemental debuff resistance much more. His next buff actually gives him Immortal Spirit or Courage, and similar to Engelbert and other modern units such as Astrius or Bold Leela, he's getting 2 casts or uses of this skill. And although we are seeing a lot more courage removal skills in the game, I do feel that this is still one of the strongest defense statuses that you can have. And especially on a tank or frontline unit, I think it's invaluable, in ensuring that they can take another hit or hold out just long enough so that that timely heal can come in onto them. Alright, his last buff here is a party buff, and this one provides 25 strike attack and 20 area resist. On top of that, it's adding a self-heal to Snow that will trigger automatically when he hits a 20% HP threshold. Very nice buff here. There are actually quite a few units within the ice elements that have strike-based damage and could take advantage of a buff like this. And obviously the area resist that this also provides is always very valuable. Now the HP restore mechanic that this has is something that we've just seen as a new mechanic in Global on Leela the Bold. And currently there's no way to actually dispel that portion of the buff here in the game today, but I do actually really like this skill on Snow, and that's because he has such a high hit points pool, in addition to having that courage as well. So I do think this skill is very, very strong. Now in terms of the buff priority, everything that I've heard and seen from the Japanese side is that in autoplay, Snow will actually lead off with his Immortal Spirit buff, and then move on to that HP recovery buff, before finally casting that defense and spirit buff if he has the time to do so. And I think that's the exact order that you would want him to implement those buffs. So I think that's definitely quite nice and refreshing that it seems we'll not need to really turn anything off for this unit, when it comes to an auto environment. Moving on to Snow's main job attacks, and you'll notice that he actually only has 3 attacks here, and that's because he has those 3 buffs that we just talked about. And first up here is his low AP skill, and this one has a range 2, range height 1, it's a single target line attack, and it has a low 126% mod. Now this one does have an effect of 25 wind killer that it does apply pre-damage, so it will do just an extra bit of damage against his advantaged element. His next attack is a range 2 with a +1 range on the cross AoE. It has a range height of 1 with an additional height on the area effect. And this time we have a medium 165% mod. And this one is providing him 40 defense penetration prior to the damage coming in. So again, very short range here on this skill, but it actually does provide him an AoE option, which is nice. And we don't often see tanks have access to defense penetration, so I think that's quite nice for him as well. His next attack is a range 2 with a range height 1. It's a single target with a large 210% damage mod, and this one has a dispel effect before landing. So buffs or haste will be eliminated before the damage comes in, and notably this is also a guaranteed hit for Snow. So definitely very nice for him to have this in his back pocket, you know, especially with that large damage modifier. All right, last one here is his Limit Burst, and this one is a range 3 with a range height 1. So definitely a common thread that we've seen here thus far on his skills is a lack of range and a lack of range height as well. Something to keep in mind for this unit. But this skill, prior to its damage coming in, has the distinction of ignoring the float status. Possibly the most worthless skill in all of War of the Visions. Actually, a common misconception about the float status is that some people out there think that it provides a +1 jump. It absolutely does not, although I really think that it should. In any event, you know, this is a second AoE option for Snow. It's a 3-tile line attack that will pierce through the first tile, and it's actually going to have a high chance to stun the targets for 1 turn. So I do actually like this limit break. It's pretty decent. You know, stun can definitely be impactful, although I do wish it was more than 1 turn. When you actually hit an enemy with stun, you know, they can't move or act, so their turn actually flips back and comes around again quicker than one might think. All right, next up, let's quickly go through Snow's sub-jobs. And his main job sub here, I think, actually could be a pretty nice PvE option if you don't already have Aranea. And that's because he's getting a 30 single target resist in peril. On top of that, he's getting a 2-hit chaining attack here as well. And both of those abilities will be very, very nice to have in a guild raid or trials situation. So it's definitely always nice when you have sort of a clear, defined role for a sub-job. And I think that's definitely the case, you know, with this one. Now, Snow does get the Pugilist sub-job as well, like many other ice units out there. And this one is good, you know, it ties into that main job, striking damage pretty well. Sadly, it's not going to enhance the lack of range that we were seeing in his main job. On the plus side though, you know, it does give him access to the Demon Purger skill, which again, on sort of a tanking, sustain style unit, I think is actually a pretty notable skill. You know, this one can actually max out at a massive 285% modifier after he's taken several hits. So nice potential there to sort of be able to retaliate and just swing back and do a bunch of damage. I do actually like breathing technique as well. You know, it gives a flat 30% heal. And this is something I've actually seen the AI even break out from time to time as well. You know, if the enemy is out of range and he's taken considerable damage. I do like this one for manual play as well for the same reason. Now, Sub gets the Ninja sub job as well. I do really wish that he had gotten Dream Within a Dream here, just to sort of enhance that PvE usability. In lieu of that, he gets Shadow Bind, and you know, I'm not really seeing much value in that skill for Snow. You know, with Snow's lack of spirit and magic resistance, he's not a unit that I would consider running at higher faiths to take full advantage of that stop effect on that skill. Outside of that, he would get Shuriken, which would actually be his highest range skill at range 5. He does also get Hyotin, you know, which is notable for sort of being a typeless damage attack and bypassing enemies' resistances, so maybe could be something interesting there. Honestly though, you know, the only reason I would probably consider this sub-job would be for manual PvP, and that's for the Poison Mist and Decider of Fate skills. So overall here, I think I'm going to be running with Pugilist, you know, outside of those couple of examples I gave for the other ones. Alright, so that was Snow's kit, and here is the vision card that's going to be released along with him. And this card definitely has him leaning into kind of that bruising nature. You know, the party effects that it's bringing here are primarily about his damage output, although it does have a little bit of a wind resistance on it as well. And you know, that could actually be somewhat interesting. You know, we do have Sadali coming in very soon, and he has a massive 48% wind in peril. You know, further down the road we have Glaciella. She also has a wind in peril. So I can definitely see some cases where having that additional wind resistance could be pretty handy. We have a pretty decent bestowed ability on the card here as well with that single target resist. You know, Ice notably has the Odin vision card as well to sort of build up upon that value. And I do find that that single target resistance is essential, you know, for any tanks out there. I will point out here as well that that party defense pen ability, you know, defense penetration is not really something that we've seen as a party effect before. So I think that alone actually makes this card very notable. You know, especially when you think of some of the classic ice units out there, such as Agrius or Gilgamesh, or even Snow himself, all of whom are lacking any sort of innate defense penetration. So I think that actually does help quite a bit in sort of modernizing the kits of those particular units, and will help out their damage, you know, quite a bit. So I do actually like the precedent, you know, that this card is setting, and I do hope we see this effect added to other elemental cards, you know, in the future. All right, next I'm just going to quickly touch on the new equipment that comes alongside Snow, and that's his glove here. And this one is interesting in that it's giving you that 15 area resist for the first 3 turns of battle. I do actually like that for a blitz or rush strategy with Snow. And essentially that's just going to net him just a little bit of extra protection on those first couple of turns of battle as he's sort of initially sieging in on the enemy, you know, before this buff would wear off. So for a smaller map or, you know, again, a rush strategy, I do actually kind of like this equipment. You know, it doesn't actually really trade off much of anything in terms of its offensive stats in order to get that. The base stats on the glove are actually pretty competitive with the other +5 gloves that we have in the game today. All right, so here's a mock build that I've put together for Snow. In terms of equipment here, you know, this survival vest I think is a must-have for Snow. It gives him that 10 single target resistance. If you don't have that item, you know, maybe you could look at the platinum robe or the smart coat. Now, notably for Snow's weapon, I have the +6 cat claws here. Now, the cat claws is an item that really hasn't seen a lot of play in War of the Visions. I do think it becomes a more compelling choice in its +6 form that will be coming relatively soon for us in Global. And I say that actually for a couple reasons. You know, first off, it's going to give 6 agility in its +6 form, which is actually pretty substantial, and you know, it gives you some flexibility to run TMRs maybe that don't have agility. The cat claws is also getting a 15 crit evasion passive in its +6 form as well. And that's a passive that I actually kind of like on a frontline tank unit. You know, we are seeing more and more units in the game which are sort of built around that crit ability and bringing extra effects along, you know, hinging on them critting. So I am finding more value in crit evasion, you know, as the game matures. Not only for reducing the damage a little bit on those attacks, but you know, also sort of muting some of those skills that may be coming alongside the crit. If you don't have the cat claws built out, you could also opt for Snow's glove that we were just talking about as well, and I think that would be a pretty good option. Now for Snow's TMR, I did give him Whisper's TMR, and I do actually kind of like this one, especially for tanks, and that's because this passively is giving 5 to all damage resistances, and that's going to free up multiple Trust Stone slots so that I can focus on other things, you know, such as elemental or debuff resistances, while still having all of those main damage types covered. For Snow's Esper, I'm using Freeze here, and that's for the ice damage that it's bringing, but also since this is more of kind of an all-around build that I've created here, I really do like that Freeze brings that 15 spirit and 6 magic resistance on top of it, and that's really going to help Snow shore up that innate magic weakness that we were talking about earlier. If you were maybe less worried about magic damage and maybe more focused on maybe a slash or missile damage party, you know, there's definitely other options out there. Even something like Mana Pool that came with the Final Fantasy 15 event is quite a nice Esper form as well. And for the most part, you know, this build is kind of more of an all-around bruising sort of damage focused build. As you can see in the vision card setup here, I've focused more on party effects surrounding on attack up, ice attack, and agility. I think if you wanted to focus maybe more on his tank factor, you could consider dropping out his own vision card and maybe going with something like the Mana Pool card to pick up some area resistance there. I do actually like the Eliza vision card on him here as a secondary, and that's for the party slash resist that it would bring, but also because it's bringing him some acquired AP. And that, you know, along with the Laswell card and the Trust Stone that I've equipped on him would get him to roughly 70% acquired AP. And this would have him in the neighborhood of 80 AP or more after just using his 2 main buffs. And that's going to allow him to actually string out several attacks and do quite a bit of damage before he has to revert to auto attacks. And in this build, you know, he's going to have no problem dishing out considerable damage. You know, you can see here he's at over 1400 attack, and in this build he'll actually have 45 innate defense penetration, and that's due to the attack Trust Stone setup that I've used. And you know, he'll have the potential to get up to 85 defense penetration with the self buff that comes in from his AoE attack. Strike resistance is also notably very difficult to build up against in War of the Visions. There are not a lot of common sources of it available on vision cards or even espers. So in that regard, I didn't feel the need to give him any strike resistance penetration on his Trust Stone setup, although I think that you could easily drop out the ice damage up effect in order to squeeze that in, you know, if you wanted to. Now, speaking of the Trust Stone loadout, you know, in my opinion, paramount to a bruising build is healing power, and that's the main reason I've decided to use the Spirit set here on the left. and added the healing power passive alongside of it. As we've seen with Leela the Bold here recently on Global, the self-healing ability gets incredible return on value with healing power, as the effect is essentially doubled, since the user of that skill is both the caster and the receiver in that scenario. So 20 healing power here would represent 40% more incoming healing on the self-heal. So rough math, we have approximately 11,400 hit points, a 0 healing power build. Snow would be looking at roughly 5,700 hit points healed back. With the 20 healing power that I've equipped here in the build, that's going to increase by 40% to roughly 7,000 healed back, which is very substantial. That sort of capability, comboed with a unit like Velis behind him, supporting him, I can see this unit being very, very hard to kill and presenting many problems for opposing players, so I do like that quite a bit. Alright, so quickly looking into the 2022 timeline, and on the JP side, Snow and his Vision card came out on week 2 of the Final Fantasy XIII collaboration. So that has us currently looking at very late September or potentially pushed into the beginning of October, depending on how things play out here in Global over the summer. Perhaps Gumi could even consider pulling Snow into the first week of the collaboration, as they did with Celis and the Final Fantasy VI collaboration. Now, in terms of other pieces for the ice elements along the way, we do have to look into July, where we're going to see Eliza as well as her Vision card. And that's a unit that I previewed a couple months back. If you haven't seen that, I will post a link to her video above. Now, also coming alongside Snow will be the return of Final Fantasy Tactics and Agrias finally getting her EX form. And honestly, I can see nice parties forming with either of these units, alongside of Snow. Snow, I think, can really get out front and create a lot of space for Eliza to do work with her long-range game, or you can just sort of try and kill the enemy through high hit points and sustain with a combination of both Snow and Agrias in kind of a double bruising setup. Definitely some interesting possibilities to think about there. In terms of the elemental meta, for fire, we do have to take note of Sweetheart Ildira, who should actually be coming into Global here very, very soon for us. And again, we have to look ahead to the Final Fantasy Tactics collab, where we're going to see Delita EX. And I'd say particularly Delita with his 48% fire imperil and overall physical bulk will be a pretty big concern for Snow. For Wind, as we talked a little bit about earlier, we do have Sadali coming in very soon for us, and the new Glaciella, who's fresh off the press on the JP side and coming in hot on the heels of this Final Fantasy XIII collaboration. And I have sort of put this, 2.5-year anniversary in its own box here. I mean, look at all the units that are coming in this short span here at the anniversary. So I think we have to sort of brace to get bombarded with that, as they like to do sort of around those big celebration moments. And Glaciella in particular, I will be doing a video on her very soon. She is just a phenomenal unit, and we're definitely going to be needing some strong ice power. So I do think that positions Snow here pretty nicely, when it comes to that. So what's my overall verdict on Snow? This is a unit with tank level bulk and nice sustain capability through Immortal Spirit and a heal back ability. On top of that, I believe his damage potential is Bruiser class. In terms of direct comparisons, I think if you were to really focus on attack based builds, other tanks we have out there like Joom, King Mont, or even Charlotte can match or come close to the attack numbers that we were seeing in the Snow builds. The main difference there is that they don't really have access to the level of defense penetration that Snow will be able to have. On top of that, they're all working on slash-based damage, which is much easier to build against in War of the Visions, especially when those tanks don't have access to a high level of slash-res penetration. Now, Snow here, being a strike-based unit, is primed to be able to do heavier damage than we're used to seeing out of that tank slot. Tank damage that I don't believe we've really seen since Dwayne was in his prime. That said, Snow's range is very, very limited, and he doesn't really have access to very large area of effect. As we talked about, between his mastery and his passive, Snow does have that 10 innate hate as well, which notably can't be dispelled. This is another huge check in the plus column for Snow, as dispel-based skills are much more common in the game than they used to be. So having all that hate innately, we know we can bank on at least those 5 first hits in battle going Snow's way. But really, that's all we're going to be able to bank on, because as we talked about, he doesn't have any further way to build up any hate on top of that innate value that he has. So I think when you're using Snow, you might be best served using more of a rush strategy and building up on his offensive capabilities, because it's in your best interest that the fight doesn't drag on too long. Although Snow's bulk is very good, especially against physical damage, he doesn't bring Protect or Shell or Regen as some of the other top tanks out there do. He's trading that out for some of his own survival tools. Though that we do have access to some of those capabilities via other units or TMRs, so I think if you're able to bring some combination of maybe Protect or Shell, Snow's staying power on the battlefield will be among the top tier. In terms of manual play for Snow, I can see some interesting possibilities for him. He does have Shikuchi and can get that 4-2 base movement. He does have that ninja sub-job that we talked about for Poison Mist, and that's going to make him highly mobile and very hard to kill. And that could pose as a very nice distraction play for a backline of Eliza and Curry. Snow does have that guaranteed hit in his back pocket as well to help deal with evade threats. So I think that, along with the status ailment limit burst that he brings, has him in a position to play very much like a King Mont. So in my opinion, I think that he could surprise a few people out there in that arena as well. So my final word here is, Snow's offensive capability is very close or on the same level as a lot of other bruisers that we've seen out there in the game. And I really think that potential, combined with his ability to stay on the battlefield with those survival tools, actually primes him to be a very solid tank. Alright guys, so that is my preview on Final Fantasy XIII Snow. And to sort of sum it up here again in a few words, he's a bruiser in a tank skin, and that's really the best way that I can say it. Personally, I really do like that brawler style of play. And I think out of the 3 units that are coming as part of this collaboration, I'm probably most excited about this one. Not because I think he's the best unit that I've ever seen, though, he is actually pretty good, but more because I think he's just bringing a new dimension for the ice element that they haven't really had before. In my head, I'm sort of just picturing a party of Rosa and Snow and Agrius, and on paper, I think that actually sounds pretty good. We'll just have to sort of wait and see how things pan out, though. With that said, how are you guys feeling about Snow? Are you going to pull for him? If so, what team combinations are you looking forward to running alongside of him? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, help us grow and be notified of my future videos. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.